Hello and welcome to this week's case review. My name is Shane from Shanesmithlaw, and today I'm going to be talking to one of our attorneys, John Wheatley, about one of his recently settled cases. He just got a great result for our client, BB, and I wanted to talk to him about that today. So, John, tell me about this accident. How did it occur? And tell me a little bit about Miss BB.
So BB was driving on the way home from work, and he was stuck in traffic, and the defendant came flying in, thought that traffic was moving when it wasn't, and rear-ended our client at a pretty high speed.
Okay. So our client was stopped, and this was on the highway or interstate?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, it was on the highway, on an interstate.
Okay, so he hit him pretty hard.
Yeah, it was a pretty high-speed collision, good amount of damage to the vehicle. Wasn't total, but it was a good amount of damage.
And what were the results to BB? How did the accident, what were their injuries?
Primarily, at first, he was complaining of neck injuries and injuries with his head from the whiplash. So when he went to the emergency room, those were the main complaints. And then once he had a couple days to let the injuries sit in, and he could really start feeling it more, he started having issues in his lower back and in his hips and in his legs. So throughout his chiropractic treatment and his early pain management treatment, they were determining whether or not it was muscular, if there was something more spinal involved with it. So it was primarily neck, back, and his head was giving him problems, which didn't start until a little bit later, but he eventually started having memory issues from concussion-like symptoms.
Okay. And the concussion showing up afterwards, is that pretty common that we see that after a little bit of time has passed, or do people normally see that right away?
I think, well, he did mention it at the emergency room that his head was bothering him, but the onset of the symptoms were gradual. And I would say that typically happens with concussion-like symptoms, is that, people think it's just a headache that might go away, or, maybe they're just having a day where their head hurts. And then they start noticing it over time that it's more frequent, and the symptoms, at least with BB, were memory loss, started to really forget more and more things throughout the day that was not normally happening, and he never had those issues before the accident.
So those sound like pretty severe injuries. Were we able to get everything resolved, or at least get some therapy or treatment, or what were we able to do for the client on the medical side of the case?
For the client, his medical treatments, it was a pretty lengthy process, not in the sense that he wasn't getting treatment, but the pain was never going away. And we were trying to determine how best to approach his pain management. We did eventually resolve a good amount of his pain, but the treating physicians determined that he would need a pretty serious surgery, one that the insurance company couldn't fully cover. And the client thought it was best to move on, and he said his pain was relieved for the most part, and that he would figure out the surgery later on down the road, because even if the insurance had the ability to give it to him, he wouldn't have been able to do it just because of life circumstances.
And when you mean the insurance company couldn't fully cover the cost of that surgery, are you talking about how they had a policy that basically was exhausted through all of his injuries, and we were able to maybe obtain that whole policy?
Yeah, so we essentially used medicals up into about a little under half the full policy limits that the liability insurance company carried. And with the surgery plus the medicals we had already used, it would have been over that amount. So we wouldn't have had the insurance money to fully cover that. But it also was what BB was wanting to do, because most of the issues had fully resolved at that point. He was still having a little bit of pain and needed the surgery, but it wasn't to the point where it was an emergency type situation.
So I guess the hope is that he can take some of the recovery you gave him, get some health insurance, and then get that surgery down the line if it impacts him where he can work or not, or the pain gets to where he can't sort of deal with it himself anymore.
Exactly. And we wanted to work with him best to resolve his pain, while also knowing that we had the ability to get him a good settlement out of it by not racking up the medicals any further. So it was just an ebb and flow process of trying to balance that.
Okay. All right. And it sounds like, serious injuries with that concussion and the concussion symptoms, the back stuff, needing a recommended surgery. Were you able to get the insurance company to come on board and basically offer their full policy to BB and you?
Not originally. So once we moved ahead and demanded the full policy limits from the insurance company, they came with a offer that was half of the policy limits, which was actually under our medical bills. So after about a month, I would say, of fighting with the insurance company, we got them to tender the full amount.
Okay. And is that something you see pretty common where, they make an offer that's, lower than what it should be, and it takes, sometimes weeks or months even of arguing back and forth by the attorney to get them to basically do a fair offer or what they ought to do?
Yeah, and I would say that with this particular case and cases like this, where we had about half of the policy limit already used in medical bills, and there was another half that seemed open to the insurance company, but to us, we knew the surgery needed to be had, so that money was going to be applied to that retroactively. So I do see this a lot with insurance companies with higher limits, such as BB had, because they essentially only want to pay for what had already been obtained, the medical treatment that had been obtained, and they don't want to pay for things in the future. And that was a good thing we got with this, is to prove to them that he is going to need this treatment, and he's going to need further treatment beyond just that surgery, and that it was worth tendering the full policy limits.
All right, well, it sounds like you talked to him about the case, understood his wishes, but then fought with the insurance company to get him as fair an offer as we could, in the sense that you got them to offer the full policy. So it sounds like a great job and good result for you and for BB as well. So good work there.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a good result.
I want to thank our listeners for tuning into us today. Remember, if you're in pain, call Shane, 980-999-9999, or order our free book, The Victim Survival Guide to Car Accidents, at Shanesmithlaw.com. We'll be going over another case next week. Hope to see you there, and click subscribe on the button below. Thanks a lot.
980-999-9999. 980-999-9999. Shanesmithlaw. In pain, call Shane.